So I am Laura Baykosh, and I am the co-founder of an organization called Inner Explorer, and we are a mindfulness-based SEL program. So we're going to talk a little bit about mindfulness. We're going to talk about why it's relevant in education, and in particular, how it can help teachers manage sort of the stress associated with just being in a classroom every day, meeting children with their own sets of issues and traumas. That's a lot. You know, I think in America and around the world, really, people don't recognize the fact that as a classroom teacher, you might have 10 or 15 or 20 kids walking in with high ACEs scores, with all kinds of situations like poverty and violence in their lives. And to take that in every single day and to be able to kind of handle that and process that and help the kids with it is an enormously important task. And I would say in most cases, we don't train teachers to do that. So the conversation that's woven through this conference has been a lot around mental health and what we're facing as a society around mental health. And so the point here is that mindfulness can be a tool to help that. So just very briefly, a little bit about me. I started out my life as a business major in college. I went to work for some big corporations and I was going to make a lot of money and all of that. And so that's all well and good. I worked for GE for many years, and during those years, I started recognizing two things. One was that I was stressed out all the time. I was traveling, I had a big team, I was flying around, and I just felt anxious and stressed. And I felt like a lot of people I knew were experiencing the same thing. And the second thing was that I had experienced my own traumas in my life, and that was causing sort of this little voice in my head to be fighting with another little voice in my head. So the voice, and some of you may be familiar with the idea that you have sort of a talk track of I'm not good enough, I'm the dumb one, I'm the not creative one, I'm the whatever. And so there's certain things that you live with in your life that, start out when you're young and it's, your family of origin or your community, and you learn these things that you think are true about yourself. And then as you go through experiences, there's other layers that get added. If you've had traumas, you might think you deserved it or somehow you caused it. And so there's a voice that's constantly going. And that voice sometimes is pretty negative. And for most people, children and adults, we don't even know half of what we're saying to ourselves because it's automatic. Like, we don't even question it. And so when adults and children take a few minutes to be in stillness and just be reflective, they start to hear that voice. And it can be a little uncomfortable at first, right? Because now you're alone with yourself and you're like, man, we're a culture of distraction. We would rather be doing something, anything, than living like who we are. But what's magical and what you'll see as you bring these things into your lives and into your classrooms is that children transform like in a matter of weeks, not years, but weeks when they start practicing, because they start to tap into something that's really amazing about them, and they start to really believe that, and they start to be able to unwind that negative voice and put that into its place, So I'd like to just start by asking a question. If you can share, what are your biggest challenges? If you're an educator, a counselor, an administrator, just feel free to say, what's the biggest thing that you're facing in your classrooms or in your schools? Anybody? Stress is usually pretty high. Has anybody experienced stress in their, okay? Most everybody, okay. What other things are you? Getting kids to listen, right? Pay attention, to listen. What else? As you walk into your classrooms or into your schools, what kind of keeps you up at night? What's like, Self-regulation, yep, that's a big one.
So many things coming at you, and you're trying to multitask and do all these different things, and then you start feeling like you're overwhelmed.
Right, so many things coming at you that you start to feel overwhelmed, right? The whole sort of chaos, right? Yes?
Just the time to get it all done.
That's a big one.
Your best friend and your worst nightmare.
Exactly. Time to get it done. I mean, I hear that a lot. I just need 2 more hours every day, but that's of course not going to happen. Anything else that you're facing that hasn't been said yet? Those are the big ones that you guys already mentioned. So another, just so I can make sure I'm gearing, this is a broad topic. I could talk all day about it, but I won't. But I want to make sure that I focus in my comments on things that matter the most to you all. So is there anything in particular that you want to make sure we cover, like something that, like what made you come here today? Yes?
This isn't what made me come here today, but when I've tried some mindfulness things in the past, sometimes if a kid has some sort of underlying trauma they're dealing with, it can come out and be maybe it could come out, but then it becomes something where you call a counselor, and so I guess that best practice is to practice mindfulness safely.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So it's really just when you're practicing, things can come up, and how do you handle those in the classroom? Right, that's a great point. I make sure and thank you, we'll cover that. What else? Is there anything else that just you must know, we want to make sure we cover? Anything else?
Just to branch off of that, just helping our students to take the time to stop and listen to their body and myself as well. Like there's something going on, we need to stop and
Yes,
do this or something.
right. So kind of how do you get into that habit or ability for everybody to maybe take a pause in the classroom? So thank you. Yes.
I came last year and different teacher teach how to apply in your classroom, like a 10 minutes activity for
Yes.
students. So if you can teach me. I teach
Yes.
Japanese, but sometimes I want the student to calm down.
Okay. So the question is just how do you get it in? There's a lot of discussion around this is great, this is so important, everybody should do it, but then it's sort of like, now what? How do you really bring it in a way that's consistent? So thank you. We'll definitely cover that. Okay. All right, so what I had planned to do is have an audio guided practice on the thing, but since the audio isn't totally working, I will just guide you in a practice so that you have a moment to kind of experience what we're talking about. So this is what we do, pretend that I'm just a recording in your classroom, and this is what we do in everything from 3-year-olds in pre-K and Head Start environments all the way through high school. We of course adapt the language based on the age group, but it's the flow is basically the same. So I will invite you now to close your eyes if you're comfortable, or feel free to just look downward if you prefer not to close your eyes. And in classrooms, we encourage everybody to be facing the same direction so that kids aren't looking at each other when they're closing their eyes. And just begin by taking 1 or 2 slow and deep breaths at your own pace. Just not trying to rush it or slow it down, just however is normal for you, just breathing in and out. And being aware of sounds in the room, and maybe how it feels to be sitting right now. Maybe tuning into where your body is touching your chair, your legs or your back. And just keep breathing in and out. And each time you hear a different sound, you can just kind of tune into that sound. Kind of notice what it feels like in your body. And then simply go back to breathing in and out. And being aware that really everything is a kind of a part of being mindful. So you may feel discomfort, which is perfectly fine. You may feel like you need it to itch or shift, which is perfectly fine. Just each time you go off into thought, just bringing yourself back to the in and out of your breath. And we generally have about 50,000 thoughts per day. And so don't worry if you have a lot of them right now, it's perfectly fine. Just keep breathing and sensing and feeling. And now when you're ready, just opening your eyes and just kind of reconnecting to right here. Wow, it got very settled. Did you feel it? So I'll encourage you now, just for a minute, please feel free to turn to whoever's close to you and just maybe mention if it felt comfortable, uncomfortable, just that direct experience. Just share with each other what it felt like, and take a minute to do that, and then we'll kind of come back and talk a little bit more. All right, everybody. So let's come back together for a minute. So does anybody have any insights that they would like to share? Sounds like it was interesting, at least. There was a lot of... Yes. So you didn't realize you were so tense. It's amazing when you go inward. Yes, great. Thank you. Were there any other observations that you want to share from just that few minutes of practice? Oh, thank you. Well, good. We're going to show you. We have a sequence of recordings. That's some of me. I was the founder, so I kind of started it, but we have a lot. We have a wide range of narrators now that can help with that. So thank you. Did anybody find it difficult to close their eyes or to kind of focus on breathing? Was that? Okay, so your shoulders are feeling tense and then you had to move them. That happens a lot when you start to go inward. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm just, we carry a lot of tension and we just aren't even aware. And kids are the same way. They'll notice that they clench up a lot. So we have a lot of practices where kids practice tensing and relaxing. Yes?
I found myself wanting to take notes. I was like, wait a minute, I should say that.
Good, you wanted to take notes. Yeah, some of it is sort of you're getting through the cognitive process of like, how does this work and what does this really mean for me? And that's a great way to kind of go into it, actually. So.
I'm going to slow down myself, too.
Right. And for some of us, especially educators, but we're cognitive beings, right? We want to figure things out. We need a plan, and that's how everything that you do most every day in your classroom is. And this is completely different. We basically say, no prep, no planning, no assessment. And I know that probably scares the heck out of the teachers in the room. We actually encourage you to sit behind your students. So if this is your classroom, and I know a lot of classes are in pods, so have everybody just turn their chair and face the same direction and sit in the back of them so that you can fully practice, closing your eyes and everything. And I know, again, that's scary. I mean, we do this in New York City and in Miami and in places that have lots of chaos and lots of trauma, and they do it. And when the teachers engage that way, the students take it even more seriously. And we have teachers that tell us, in my 30 years of teaching, I have never felt so connected to my students before, because it changes the dynamic in the classroom to something where we're sort of both learning and we're both being together. There's, you probably felt a little something as we did this together in the room. There's just sort of a connection that occurs naturally as we're all kind of going inward. So, questions before we move on? Yes?
I just wanted to say, it's interesting you say that because I do the opposite when I do mindfulness, and my kids are, most of the time they don't even though I say close your eyes or look down, I don't even know that they know that their eyes are still open, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a chanting I say, and I say, it ends with I'll be your eyes. So I keep my eyes open so they can trust that they can be safe with their eyes closed.
Yes,
People watch.
that is a great.
So I kind of do the opposite.
Yeah, that's a great practice. And I think, as educators, you start to figure out what works. And so what she was saying is that she will kind of offer to keep her eyes open so that the students can feel comfortable closing their eyes. And I think that's so perfect, especially as you start. And then I would encourage you to let them know, like, we've been doing this for a week or two, we're good now. And this is for me, your educator, as much as it is for you. And so I want to be able to practice along with you, because I think for teachers, when you're always on and you're always managing the class and you're always doing everything, you don't get a chance to have that reflective time. And you know, maybe you probably do it at home, which is amazing, but we find a lot of teachers don't have time to do it at home. So then you're left with no practice at all. And so this is a way that you can kind of embed practice into your day. Thank you. Yeah. So great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can kind of weave it in, so I think that's really wise. And you have to kind of get a feel for your class. Every class is a little bit different too. So it sounds like a lot of you are familiar with mindfulness. I just gave you a little experience of mindfulness, so now you know what it is. How many in this room are doing some kind of practice with students? It sounds, oh, great. Yay, thank you, thank you. Fantastic. So for those that are coming to it sort of a little bit newer, the definition that's used widely is just awareness of the present moment. So as we sat and practiced together, we were tuning in to our inner experiences. We weren't going off on some imaginary journey, which is a different practice, and that's good too. But mindfulness is really about going in. And so all of the guides are really trying to point kids inward to their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, so that they can just start to befriend themselves, right? In our culture, oh, that scared me. So we can tune in to the fact that my entire central nervous system just freaked out. Thank you for that. That's all right. So actually, that's a really good example, right? Who felt like their heart jump and their emotions charge and their fight or flight instinct? Like that's what happens in our life, right? It's not always that obvious though, right? We don't always have, sometimes it's like the thought of going home and being bullied on the way home, or it's the thought of a test that we're not prepared for that gets us. Thank you. That was a perfect example. Thank you. It's like I was like I planned that. So the thing that I just want to really point out about mindfulness is that the very first thing is to just be open and kind to yourself. Right? We will never have peace and love and compassion in the world if we cannot do that for ourselves. And I know very often we are the last ones that we give that love and kindness to. But so through these practices for just a few minutes a day, if nothing else, be kind to yourself. And so if your brain is going off on 20 different things as the guide, as me or a recording is walking you through something and you're making your list for dinner tonight, or you're worrying about some papers you hadn't corrected, just as you bring yourself back, don't beat yourself up about that. Oh, I'm thinking and I can't do this and this isn't. Just say, there's my thinking brain again, and there's my list maker, and just try to observe it as an outsider kind of looking in. And you'll find that as you do that, you will just settle very naturally. So the whole idea of non-judgment isn't just that there's no right or wrong. Of course there's right or wrong in the world, but while you're practicing, try not to judge yourself as I'm doing this right, I'm doing this wrong, I should do it longer, I should do it. Just let it be. And I had this very wise teacher once say to me, because I was in my early days, I've been practicing for 25 years, but in my early days, I was getting mad at myself, like, oh, that was such a busy practice today, and I felt like I was all over the place. And she said, that's perfect, because that just needed to get out, and now it's out. Right? And it kind of gave me this feeling of settle, like, oh, okay, good. So when I have a really busy practice, it just needed to be released. So. And so with children, the other point, a lot of people tell us, kids can't get this, kids don't understand, there's no way they can sit for 5 or 10 minutes. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. We are serving nearly 1 million children with daily practice today through this program, and there's lots of other programs, and so kids are getting exposed to this kind of thing, and it is literally transformative. And when I say that, I have literally hundreds and hundreds of stories that kids that were the most challenging, right, that had the most difficult backgrounds, come into themselves in this really amazing way. And I will tell you one story, which is my current favorite, but it always gets, every month we hear different things. But this happened this summer in Miami. This school was right on the border of the worst neighborhood in Miami. So we were bringing a congressman in, and his staff said, we can't bring him here because it is too dangerous. There are shootings, a couple shootings every week. We don't have enough security detail to bring the congressman here. This is Congressman Tim Ryan, who's a huge advocate of mindfulness in school. And so Tim, of course, said, gosh, if these 5-year-olds can go to the school, I'm gonna go. So he went anyway. And so at this school, they were doing daily mindfulness for just a couple months. Right at the end of the school year, a couple of teachers decided to try it and see what they thought. This one girl was in a home life that was pretty challenging. You know, it was a high poverty school, Title I, and her mother was being violently abused on a regular basis by her boyfriend. So there's this domestic violence situation in her household. 10-year-old girl had been practicing for a couple months and was in summer school, so she continued through the summer. She went home one day, and her mother was getting beaten up again, like very violently, you know, was getting slammed against the wall, you know, strangled, the whole thing. So the girl walked in, the mother was on the floor, you know, kind of backed up, and the girl said, you can't do this here anymore. And so the adults stopped for a minute, and she said, if you keep doing this, I'm gonna have to call the police. And she very calmly walked out of the room, went into her bedroom, sat on her bed, and just started breathing, just kind of as she had been learning in school. She was very calm, very connected to herself. And when I heard this first, the principal told me, I had a little panic reaction. I'm like, oh my gosh, right? Walking into that situation. But what happened is that her mother walked into the room, and she said, something snapped for me. Like, she started bawling, she kicked the boyfriend out, and she said to the principal the next day, the transformation I've seen in my daughter in these last 2 months after she's been doing mindfulness are so profound. Like, she is the most poised, confident person I know. And I realize I probably should do this too, because I think it would help me. And so when you think about, you know, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about violence and substance abuse and suicide and poverty, right, that we see everywhere in our country. I mean, these rates are going up. They're not going down, they're going up. And we're all struggling to figure out, what do we do? And right there in that apartment, she broke the cycle of violence, right? She didn't have somebody swooping in to do it for her. She broke that cycle in her family, right? And started changing the pathway for them. And that's the power, like these practices, when kids learn them early and start to embed them in their lives, this is what will make transformation in our country. And it will start from the ground up. It is not programs, like we've had poverty programs and whatever programs for decades, and they are not working because they're not getting to the root. And the root is the individual, the root is the voice, right, in our heads, and getting a hold of that. And the root is being able to dive into our potential and be able to have that spring forth in a way that's sort of, you know, based on our amazingness, right? All of us humans, we all have this capacity. So that is, I wish I could tell you, that's such a strange story. It was the one-off. We hear it all the time, all the time. So I encourage this. So this is one of the reasons why we do this work, because the kids are so, even kids that aren't in as extreme situations as the one I described, tell us all the time that this is the only time they have to be in stillness. This is the only time that they have to be reflective of themselves, because the rest of their world is about external, how many likes, how many followers, how many snaps, and the rest of it. And we all know, I mean, we're all in that world, right? And for children, it's even more difficult because their brains aren't developed well enough yet to be able to navigate this stuff. And so we don't even know what we're doing to kids. We say the rates of things like suicide are going up, and there's sort of a correlation with technology, but we don't know yet. But we do know that we need a countermeasure to kind of help stop that. So. And just a quick thing on Inner Explorer. We're a nonprofit, and I'm going to get to the detail of how you do it in 1 second. But I just want to give you guys a sense. So when I worked for GE, traveled, did all this stuff, and then I realized that mindfulness was really important, not just for adults in the work world, but for children in education. And so we started the organization as a nonprofit. I mentioned we're about 1 million mindful children strong now. But if we really want change in the world, we need to help kids embed these practices as often as we can. So we're really trying to work together with a number of different organizations to help bring this forth in the world in ways that educators and kids can have access. So you already know most of these stats. The numbers on stress keep going up. Every time I see an article, I see higher rates of stress. But this is what you're facing, right, in the classrooms. Kids are getting bullied. Kids feel sad and hopeless. There are 2x increase in teen girls committing suicide. 30% higher in teen boys committing suicide. Kids younger and younger committing suicide. You know, not to mention substance and all this other stuff. So a lot of the speakers from the last few days touched on this. Like, we don't have a behavior problem in a lot of places. We actually have a trauma problem and a mental health problem. And so it's really about how do we get our arms around this in ways that are going to, you know, be sustainable. So most of you, I know this is a super busy chart, but there's a lot here, and it was talked about in several of the sessions already. So when the brain is on stress, and chronic stress isn't like, oh, I'm so stressed. Chronic stress is that underneath thing that you're just like, there's no food at my house, and I have violence in my community, and you're not outwardly showing it, but your body inwardly is hyper aroused. And so chronic stress, as you heard from Tina's talk, like you flip your lid, right? The thinking parts of the brain literally go offline. And in functional MRI, that's what they showed. This part of the brain is dark. There is no activity happening here. And so we can teach kids, hey, when you're upset, take a breath. Hey, when you're upset, use your words, et cetera, et cetera. But that isn't accessible, right? When somebody's hyper aroused, boom, that information about take a breath lives here, right? So what mindfulness does is it starts to change how this is regulated. So the limbic system in here starts to get regulated down, so it starts to calm down, and the thinking brain kind of goes back online. When they talk about resilience, it's really the time for this to come back online, right? And they time it. So like once you flip your lid and this goes dark, how fast? And so what mindfulness does is it brings this on faster. So you're still going to have times where somebody cuts you off in traffic or a child really frustrates you. So you know, mindfulness doesn't stop those things from happening, but it makes you more prepared to handle them with care and, you know, with great thought. So what does it do? And we're really focused on the entire community. As I mentioned with that parent in Miami, through this approach that we have, parents get a chance to connect in. So if you're running a program in your classroom, you can invite all the families of the children in your classroom to tune in. And so they can also get 5 or 10 minutes of stress reduction in their day. And they can listen whenever. You know, they're not listening to your class, they're listening to the same practice that your class is listening to. So there's a lot here, and there's even more that we're not mentioning. But mindfulness, there's 6,000 scientific studies that are showing that mindfulness improves how your brain works, how your body processes stress. So we're training attention, as somebody over here had said. As kids start to practice every day, it's building a muscle. They're learning how to focus their attention for longer and longer periods of time. And then, as I mentioned, it enhances things like impulse control that somebody else mentioned. Kids are better regulated. Parents call all the time and say, what has been going on, because my kids aren't fighting as much at home anymore. Or they're sounding more, you know, like if something happens that they don't like, they're talking about it instead of being reactive to it. And so for teachers, just imagine if every single day, maybe first thing in the morning or right after lunch, whatever's the hardest part of your day with your students, pick that time and spend 10 minutes doing a practice. What would that look like in your world? Like, how would that, you were just saying, felt like this, and somebody over here said, I felt like my muscles were super tense. So imagine if every single day you had an opportunity to sit and to be reflective and to tune into yourself and to your gifts, right? And to why you love teaching and things like that. Does it sound interesting? Does it sound doable? Okay. And somebody mentioned time, right? Because that's always a factor. You're going to put one more thing into the day. How am I going to fit this if I'm jammed already? And so there is research that shows that if you do this 10-minute practice every day, you actually save about 20 minutes in the day because kids are more regulated. So how many times do you stop and have to redirect, or, as you saw on that chart, it's 30 times a day. So if you, generally kids, we have a 60% reduction in behavior problems, so you can kind of see that if kids are better behaved 60% of the time, you're building in a little bit more time than you had. We have a lot of high school teachers tell us, I got through 2 or 3 more sections of physics or of math. And so we know when kids are better regulated, you're getting through more material as well. And then at home, when parents and caregivers start to connect in, we hear from teachers a lot, I do all of this work all day, and then the child goes home, and whatever the environment is, sometimes it's challenging, and the child comes back in the next day, and I feel like I'm having to redo. And it's like Groundhog Day, right? Over and over. And so with this idea, we believe that if we can connect families to these tools that are going to help them reduce their stress and help them understand that voice and how to kind of manage through that they're going to provide maybe, a more stable environment for their children. And so that's kind of how the whole thing works together. Any questions about that? So, and I'll send these slides out for anybody that's interested, but I like to point out now, so mindfulness has been around for 40 years, give or take, lots of research. All of these universities are investing heavily into mindfulness. So if you're not aware, if you went on to Harvard Mindfulness or Yale Mindfulness, any of these universities and you just put mindfulness in your Google search, tons of things will pop up. So universities are investing a ton of money because it changes how the brain works. It changes the function of the brain, the structure of the brain in ways that promote well-being, in ways that promote better thinking, more creativity. And so they're investing big time in these practices and in these tools. And then these are probably some organizations that you've heard of. If you think about almost every top organization, company in the world, and these are just a handful that I pulled, they all are teaching their employees mindfulness. Every single one of them, including every branch of the military. And so what does that tell you about the power, right? They're not going to invest money in this field if it's not doing something for them, right? So we live in a world of stress, of distraction, and those things take a toll on people's health, on their productivity, on their ability to perform at work. And so these companies are saying, we got to do something about it. And so what we're saying is, let's start earlier. Let's start earlier in the life cycle and give kids these tools as they grow up so that they can process trauma more effectively. We can't stop all the trauma, unfortunately, but we can start to, undo the cycle of it, as we were just talking about with that child in Miami. So, this says a lot, I think. Oh, and one other point about Google, and again, if you're interested, I can send you the study, but Google did a study a couple of years ago now, and they outlined, they were they're a big analytics company, of course, and so they were trying to figure out what are the skills and attributes that make people successful at Google. So they did a whole study with thousands of their employees. And they had sort of the top 8 things. And Google had mostly been hiring from top universities, people that were data science people, math people, and that kind of thing, because that's their field, right? They're writing code and doing all this creative work. And so out of the top 8 skills that would be necessary to be successful at Google, What do you think technical aptitude was on a scale of 1 to 8? Does anybody have a guess? 3. That's a good guess, but nope. Anybody else? So technical skill, Google. We all know Google. Anybody have a guess? Any others? Come on. Okay. 8. It was number 8. And they were surprised. They were actually shocked. And 1 through 7 all fall within soft skills, right? Communication, listening, ability to be empathetic, coaching skills. So the top 7 were soft skills that are developed by these kinds of tools by SEL. And number 8 was technical know-how, which is kind of amazing when you think about that, right? And so we heard a speaker yesterday talk about the fact that we don't even know what the skills are exactly that kids are going to need for this next generation when they graduate. But we do know that these softer skills matter. And that's been sort of universally shown to us. So mindfulness is definitely gaining steam. There's a lot of good evidence that it works on the topics that we care about, like grades, test scores, behavior, besides empathy and some of those other things I mentioned. So the last couple of things that I wanted to share are just really how do you bring it in to your classroom. So as I mentioned, no prep, no planning. So this tool that we're talking about, but there's others, and I'm happy to talk to you all about the various options that are out there. But this tool has 4 different levels from preschool all the way through high school, and there are 90 practices that are already pre-done and pre-narrated. They follow a world-recognized protocol, which is called MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And you just log in and press play every day. That's it. So it couldn't be easier. So I wanted to just show you what it's like, but we won't, I guess, I don't know if we'll have sound. So bear with me for 1 second. So here's the page, if you can see. Just clicking login. It's gonna remember me. So somebody should time me. That was what, 2 seconds? And so I don't know if we'll be able to play a whole practice. So you can just see 1, 2, 3. So if I had just started, it would have popped up at 1, right? And I'm just going to see I don't know if the sound is working. Oh. Okay. So the sound isn't working. But just imagine that's it. So you have a computer in your room, it's hooked up to a speaker. You say to the kids, okay, it's time for Inner Explorer. You pick the same time every day so that they know that it's a routine. A lot of teachers do it right after lunch or right after recess, if you have recess, if you're an elementary teacher. So whenever it's just the hardest or in between 2 difficult subjects. And you press play. So we have a number of narrators, we have different tools, but that's it. Like, you don't need training. You don't need anything but an ability to log in and press play. Now, what we do find with educators is after you've been doing it for a few weeks, you'll probably want to learn more because it will be interesting. You'll have these experiences and you'll be like, this is interesting, and this is what I'm seeing with my students. And then just go to the tool kit and play around. There's some videos in there and some papers and things. So if you want to know more, you can access more, but you don't need to do that to start. And the whole idea is that teachers have so many things on their plates, right? There's so much that you have to do every day, that this is one thing that you can do for yourself and your students that is simple and that works. And we have people after 2 or 3 weeks that call and say, I can't believe what I'm seeing in my classroom. So I would encourage you all, you can just sign up for free. There's trials online, just try it for a couple weeks. But don't be surprised if after a couple days the kids are like, this is stupid. Because when you start to go inward, it can be uncomfortable. And so you just have to kind of say, yeah, okay, but we're gonna do it. And use some of those companies and organizations, like, do you like the NBA? Do you like the, sports, music? All kinds of people do it. So just use something that they care about. If you have an Apple product or an LG product or all those organizations are doing this work. So I'll go back here. All right, so you've been hearing from me. This is a first grade teacher, and I'm not sure if the sound's going to work. Okay, so we'll just skip that. But was going to reiterate what I've been saying, but in her own words. So you can find that on our website if you're interested. But the thing that I loved about what she said is that she's in an urban school in Oakland, California. Most of the kids, 50% of the kids know somebody in jail, and it's that kind of environment. And she said that it helps her reconnect to why she loves teaching and to her joy of teaching. And we hear that a lot from educators, that it's so overwhelming that you start to really lose sight of why you're even doing the work. And so it was helping her kind of get back to that. So I mentioned a little bit, but it's CASEL approved. We're considered a related program within CASEL, so it does fit into that model of social emotional learning. And I mentioned you get a little bit more teaching time. And these for the administrators in the group, or even for parents, there are hardcore stats on what the potential results are. So we have published papers on the program that do show it improves kids' grades in things like reading and science and math. Math, interestingly, in all the studies I've read in mindfulness, math seems to be the subject that's influenced the most, which is kind of interesting because it's sort of the least likely teachers to want to do mindfulness because there's so much pressure to improve math. But math seems to be influenced no matter what time. It's not like you have to do it right before math. It just universally works. And so this is kind of the process. So you can sign up by just going to our site. As I said, there's a free trial for 30 days. You can get a sense of if you like it. You can stay with the trial forever. If you want more, you can certainly do that. And it couldn't be easier to get started. And sometimes I was hoping to be able to kind of just play day one and show you what that was like. So you'd, oh, okay. And how are we doing for time? But I think we're probably out of time now. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. So we got a speaker now, yay. So as we wind down, I'll just kind of put one on so that you can hear it. But before we wrap, what questions? I know we've covered a ton in this handful of minutes. So what's making you think like no way, or yeah?
Just practical. What's the difference between free and subscription?
Yes, good question. So the difference between free and subscription. So free is you have a 30-day trial. You could stick with that forever. Like, we're a nonprofit. We're not trying to make money, but we do need to keep the operations going. So a subscription, there's two options. One is $450 for the whole school for a year-long license. It's in English, Spanish, all the tools, all the age groups. And so that is, costs maybe $10 a classroom, depending on how big your school is for the year. And then there's another subscription model that's $1,000 a year, and that's if you wanted every single family to have full access. So I mentioned the thing called tune-in. So as a teacher, you can invite the parents and caregivers from your particular class to hear that lesson. But sometimes parents want it all the time. They might have a child here and an older one, and they want to be able to use the tool. And in that case, that's $1,000, and you can invite every single family associated with your school. So that's about $4 a license a year. So pretty reasonable. Sometimes PTAs will pay that. So what other questions? Thank you. Does it sound reasonable? Like, oh, this could work, this might, okay. All right, so how many of you are going to try it? Yay! Awesome. And we love feedback. So there's ways to provide feedback right online after the practice. You can say, I loved this, I didn't like this, you should do. So we take the feedback really seriously. We're on, I think, our 5th or 6th revision of the different program levels because we're continuing to adapt and improve. We have a lot of different narrators, so kids should be able to hear themselves in it. So any other questions before I let you go? All right. Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.